His face. That's the image I conjure when I need to remember what true victory feels like. Not the slick, smiling mask he wore for the world, the one that charmed business partners and fooled the neighbors. Number 1. I remember the real face, the one that emerged when the walls of his carefully constructed kingdom came crashing down around him in the sterile, beige silence of a courtroom. It was a fascinating, horrifying spectacle. The color drained from his skin, leaving it a pasty, mottled gray like spoiled meat. His jaw, usually set in a line of arrogant certainty, went slack, his mouth hanging open in a perfect, silent O of disbelief. But it was his eyes that held the real story. In them, I saw the confident predator suddenly realize it was in a trap it had not seen, a trap it had, in fact, helped build. For the first time in my 32 years of life, watching my father's world implode, I smiled. A genuine, deep, and truly satisfied smile. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand the beauty of that final, glorious collapse, you have to understand the weight of the rubble. You have to know how each brick of that prison was laid and how my own hands were forced to mortar them together. It all comes back to a letter. It's funny, isn't it? How a single piece of paper can hold more destructive power than a bomb. I'm looking at it now, all these years later. The heavy, cream-colored cardstock, the embossed letterhead of a law firm I'd never heard of. It feels cold, even now. My fiancé, Mark, is making coffee in the kitchen of our home, the home we bought, and the smell of it fills the air with a warmth that feels like a shield against the memory. He doesn't know the whole story, not the granular, ugly details. He just knows that my family and I are estranged, and that he's glad they're not in my life. He's a good man, a kind man. The kind of man who would never understand the casual cruelty my family specialized in. Holding this letter, I feel the need to finally lay it all out, if only for myself, to trace the path from there to here. So let's start at the beginning, or what passed for the beginning of the end. For 15 years since I got my first real job out of college, I had been the family's silent, unacknowledged benefactor. It started small. My mother would call, her voice laced with that specific brand of theatrical despair she was so good at. "Oh, darling, the property taxes are just astronomical this year. Your father is so stressed, he's not sleeping." So I would pay them. Then it was the utilities. The electric bill is nearly $400. Can you imagine? It's this drafty old house. So I would set up an automatic payment. My brother, Kevin, was the real drain. The golden child, the one who could do no wrong even as he failed at everything he tried. There was the import-export business that somehow resulted in him owning 300 unsellable ceramic gnomes. I paid off that debt. There was the revolutionary app for rating different kinds of toast. I funded that too. Each failure was met not with accountability, but with excuses from my parents. "He's just finding his feet," my father would say, clapping Kevin on the back. "He has an entrepreneurial spirit." What he had was an allergy to hard work and an addiction to their unconditional approval. My role was different. I was not the golden child. I was the workhorse, the reliable one, the one who got a sensible degree, worked 60-hour weeks as a project manager, and lived in a tiny apartment so I could funnel the majority of my income into their black hole of a budget. I was praised, but only for my utility. "Thank God for you, sweetie," my mother would sigh. "We don't know what we'd do without you." It was never "thank you for your sacrifice," or "we're so proud of your success." It was always about what I could do for them. The biggest expense, the real albatross around my neck, was the mortgage. Their house was a monument to my father's ego, a sprawling 5-bedroom McMansion in a gated community, complete with a 3-car garage and a pool they used maybe twice a year. It was a stage for their performance of wealth, a performance that was funded almost entirely by me. When my father's consulting business took a nosedive after the 2008 crash, he didn't downsize. He didn't cut back. He came to me. I remember the conversation perfectly. We were in his home office, a room paneled in dark wood that always smelled faintly of furniture polish and desperation. He laid out the financials with a grim sort of pride, as if the sheer scale of his debt was an accomplishment. "The bank is being unreasonable," he'd said, gesturing vaguely at a pile of red-stamped envelopes. "This is just a temporary cash flow issue. If you could just cover the mortgage for a few months. 6 at the most, just until I land the new contract." I was 25, naive, desperate for his approval. What did I know about cash flow issues? I just saw my father, this man who had always seemed like a giant to me, looking small and scared. So I said yes. 6 months turned into a year turned into 5, 5 turned into 10. It became the new normal. Every month, a significant chunk of my salary went directly from my account to their mortgage lender. They offered me a perk for my generosity, the granny flat, a small one-bedroom apartment over the detached garage. "It's perfect," my mother had chirped. "You can save on rent and we'll have you close by." What she meant was, we can keep a closer eye on our investment. Living there was its own special kind of hell. There was no privacy. My mother would let herself in when I was at work to tidy up, which was code for snoop through my things. My father would knock on my door at all hours to have me review his business proposals or just to complain about the state of the world. Kevin used my tiny living room as his personal lounge, leaving his dirty dishes and video game controllers everywhere. I was a tenant in the house I was paying for, but with none of the rights and all of the obligations. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I was doing the right thing, helping my family. I swallowed my resentment and kept writing the checks. I sacrificed my own dreams of home ownership, of travel, of financial freedom, and laid them on the altar of their comfort. I thought somewhere deep down that one day they would see it. One day they would be grateful. One day they would finally love me as much as they loved the idea of their perfect son. I was a fool, an absolute blind, willing fool. The inciting incident, the slap in the face that finally woke me up, arrived on a Tuesday. It was tucked into my mailbox between a credit card offer and a pizza flyer, the aforementioned letter. I sat on my cramped sofa, the one that always smelled a little like Kevin's feet, and read it. The legalese was dense, but the message was brutally clear. It was a formal notice from their lawyer informing me that my informal tenancy in the granny flat was being terminated. They were giving me 30 days to vacate the premises. The reason cited was my increasingly unstable and concerning lifestyle, which, they claimed, was creating a negative environment for the family. Unstable lifestyle? I worked a demanding job, came home, ate a salad, watched an hour of television, and went to bed. My life was the very definition of stable. It was monastic. The only concerning thing I had done recently was start quietly dating a man from work, a fact I had tried to keep to myself. Clearly, I had failed. They must have seen his car. But it was the next paragraph that truly took my breath away. It stated that, given my demonstrated irresponsibility, they were also formally severing financial ties. It was phrased as if they were cutting me off, as if they were the benefactors and I was the dependent. There was no mention of the mortgage, no mention of the decade of payments. It was a complete and total erasure of my sacrifice. I read it 3 times, my hands shaking so badly the paper rattled. It didn't make sense. It was a declaration of war I didn't even know was being waged. Why? Why would they do this? And then, like a key turning in a rusty lock, it clicked. The new contract. A few weeks earlier, my father had been crowing about landing a massive, long-term project. He was flush with cash for the first time in years. They didn't need me anymore. I wasn't a daughter. I was a stopgap measure, a line of credit that had served its purpose. And now that the real money was flowing again, they were cutting me loose. Not just cutting me loose, but kicking me out, humiliating me, painting me as the unstable one to justify their cruelty. They weren't just getting rid of me, they were salting the earth so I could never come back. The shock was a physical thing, a cold wave that started in my gut and spread through my limbs. Then came the pain, sharp and blinding. And right behind the pain, something else began to bubble up. Something hot and clean and clarifying, rage, a righteous volcanic fury that burned away 15 years of naive hope. They had made a fatal miscalculation. They had assumed the workhorse had no teeth. They were about to learn just how badly they had misjudged their asset. In that moment, sitting in the granny flat that I had paid for 10 times over, I made a decision. I would not cry. I would not beg. I would not reason with them. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I would give them exactly what they asked for. I would vacate the property, and I would sever all financial ties, immediately, starting with their mortgage. But before I did anything, I made one phone call. The only person in my family who had ever seen me as more than a means to an end. My grandmother, my father's mother, a woman as sharp and tough as a diamond. "Grandma," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "I need your help. Dad's finally done it." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then her voice, clear and cold as a winter morning. "Good. It's about time. Now you listen to me very carefully. Don't you dare talk to them. Don't answer their calls. Don't reply to their texts. You are going to pack a bag, and you are going to come stay with me. And you are going to bring every single bank statement, every email, every scrap of paper you have. It's time to show that arrogant son of mine what a real balance sheet looks like." That was the moment the plan began to form, and it started with a secret my parents knew nothing about because my grandmother was far smarter than her son ever gave her credit for. Years ago, when I first started my job, she had pulled me aside. "Your father," she had said, stirring her tea, "is a man who sees people as tools. You are his most useful tool right now. But one day he will think you are no longer necessary, and he will put you away without a second thought. You need your own toolbox." She had taken a portion of the inheritance from my grandfather, and instead of giving it to my father, had placed it in a trust for me. It wasn't a fortune, but it was a significant safety net, a get-out-of-jail-free card. I had never touched it. I had almost forgotten it was there, a silent guardian in the background of my life. My parents had no idea it existed. They believed my only assets were my salary, a salary they had so effectively siphoned off for years. They believed I was trapped, dependent on their generosity of letting me live in the granny flat. They thought that by kicking me out, they were rendering me homeless and helpless. This was my advantage, my trump card. Their ignorance was my shield and my sword. The second part of my advantage was my own meticulous nature. I'm a project manager. I document everything. For 10 years, I had kept a detailed spreadsheet. Every single mortgage payment, every utility bill, every wire transfer to bail out Kevin. I had dates, amounts, and confirmation numbers. More than that, I had the emails and text messages, hundreds of them. My father asking, "Can you cover the mortgage this month? We'll pay you back when the Johnson contract comes through." My mother texting, "Sent you the power bill, sweetie. You're a lifesaver. We'll count it towards your equity in the house." Equity. They had said it themselves. They had framed these payments not as gifts, but as an investment, a loan. They had just never intended to pay it back. They had given me all the ammunition I would ever need. They just didn't know it. So, the strategic decision, made with my grandmother's calm guidance, was simple. Do not engage. Do not warn them. Let their own arrogance be the accelerant on the fire they were about to start. My father assumed that after a week or two of the silent treatment, I would come crawling back, begging for forgiveness. He believed he held all the power. The greatest strategic victories are won when your opponent doesn't even realize they are on a battlefield. The preparation was methodical, clinical. I took 2 days off work for a family emergency, which wasn't even a lie. The first thing I did was go to my bank. I opened a new set of accounts at a completely different branch. Then I contacted the firm that managed my trust and had the entire balance transferred. My old account, the one my parents knew about, the one connected to their mortgage, was left with a balance of exactly $100. Next, I called the mortgage company. I navigated their automated phone tree until I got a real person. I explained calmly that I was canceling the automatic payment that had been scheduled for the first of the month. The woman on the other end was confused. "Ma'am, this payment has been coming from your account for over 120 consecutive months." "I know," I said, "and now it's stopping. The homeowners will need to make other arrangements." I gave her no other explanation. I didn't need to. The third step was the physical retreat. My grandmother was right. I couldn't stay in the granny flat. It was their territory. I spent the next 48 hours packing. Not everything, just the essentials. Clothes, personal documents, sentimental items. I was a ghost, moving silently while they were at work or out to dinner, celebrating their new freedom from their burdensome daughter. I boxed up years of my life, each item a reminder of a life lived on their terms. I left behind the furniture they had gifted me from their own basement, the mismatched dishes, the threadbare towels. I was shedding a skin. I hired a small moving van, and under the cover of darkness, I moved my boxes to a storage unit. Then, with nothing but a suitcase and my laptop bag, I drove to my grandmother's house, an hour away. The last thing I did before I pulled out of that long driveway for the final time was drop my key to the granny flat into their mailbox. No note, no explanation, just the quiet, metallic clink of a door closing for good. I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. The first phase was complete. I had extricated myself. Now, all I had to do was wait. The first of the month came and went. Silence. They probably didn't even notice. They likely assumed the payment went through as it always had for the last decade. The 5th of the month passed. Still nothing. I imagined them living their lives, enjoying their newfound wealth, completely oblivious. The arrogance was breathtaking. They had kicked me out, declared me unstable, and yet still expected me to pay for the roof over their heads. The first call came on the 10th. It was my father. I was at work, and I let it go to voicemail. His tone was breezy, almost condescending. "Hi, sweetheart, just calling to check in. Things got a little heated, I know, but I'm sure you've had time to cool off. Why don't you give me a call? We can talk this through." He wasn't apologizing. He was offering me a chance to apologize to him. I deleted the message. A few days later, the first letter from the bank would have arrived at their house, the friendly reminder about a missed payment. This, I knew, would be the first crack in their smug facade. The calls started to escalate. My mother this time. "Darling, your father is very worried. You haven't returned his calls. We just want to know you're okay. Please, just let us know you're safe." It was a performance of concern, but underneath it, I could hear the brittle edge of anxiety. They didn't care if I was safe. They cared if the mortgage had been paid. I deleted her message, too. Then came Kevin. His approach was different, belligerent, entitled. "What the hell is your problem?" His voicemail started. No preamble. "Mom and Dad are freaking out. They got some letter from the bank. Did you forget to pay the mortgage? You're being so dramatic. Whatever it is you're mad about, get over it and fix this. You're ruining everything." Ruining everything. The irony was so thick, I could have choked on it. He thought my paying for his entire family's lifestyle was the natural order of things, and my stopping was a disruption of that sacred order. It was the first time I laughed since I'd received the letter. A real, hearty laugh. The absurdity of it was a tonic. Throughout this period, my grandmother was my rock. We'd sit in her cozy living room in the evenings, a cup of tea in my hands, and I'd play her the latest voicemail. She would listen with a grim expression, then nod. "Good," she'd say. "Let the pressure build. A man like your father doesn't learn from conversation. He only learns from consequences. Pain is the only teacher he's ever respected." She helped me find a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Albright who specialized in financial disputes. I spent an afternoon in her office, laying out the spreadsheet, the bank statements, the folder of printed out emails and text messages. She looked through it all, her expression growing more and more impressed. "This is remarkable," she said, peering at me over her glasses. "The documentation is impeccable. You've basically done my job for me." They called the payments a contribution to your equity in the home. "In writing." "In multiple text messages," I confirmed. She leaned back in her chair and smiled, a thin, predatory smile that I was very glad was on my side. "Well then, this is going to be fun. Their attempt to evict you and paint you as unstable is a gift. It establishes a clear motive and a pattern of malicious behavior. We're not just going to defend you. We're going to file a counterclaim. We're going to put a lien on that house for every single penny you put into it, plus interest." While my parents were descending into panic, I was building my fortress. I found a new apartment, a small but bright one-bedroom in a part of the city they would never think to look for me. I used the money from my trust for the deposit and first few months' rent. For the first time in my adult life, I was paying for my own home, and only my own home. The feeling was intoxicating. Meanwhile, the antagonist's arrogance continued to shine. Believing my silence was a sign of weakness and shame, they went on the offensive with the extended family. My phone started ringing with calls from aunts and uncles. "I heard what happened," my Aunt Carol said, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. "Your mother told me you've been having a difficult time. You know, you can't treat your parents like that, after all they've done for you." All they've done for me. I just breathed. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain. "Thank you for your concern, Aunt Carol," I said politely, and then I ended the call. Letting them believe their own narrative was a crucial part of the strategy. The more they lied to others, the more they would believe the lies themselves. They were casting me as the ungrateful, unstable villain in their story, and in doing so, they were blinding themselves to the reality of their own vulnerability. They flaunted their lifestyle on social media. My mother posted pictures of a lavish dinner party they hosted. "So wonderful to be surrounded by family and friends in our beautiful home," she captioned it. My father posted a picture of himself on his boat, a boat I knew was in arrears, with the caption, "Hard work pays off." It was all a desperate performance, a way to convince themselves and the world that everything was fine, that they didn't need me. But I knew the truth. I knew the second missed payment notice had arrived. Then the third. The calls to me became more frequent, more frantic. My father's tone shifted from condescending to furious. He left a long, rambling message, yelling about duty and family and honor. "You are legally and morally obligated to help us. I am your father. You owe me this." It was incredible. He had legally evicted me, and now he was claiming I was legally obligated to pay for the house he had kicked me out of. His narcissism was a universe unto itself, with its own laws of physics. The masterstroke of their hubris came about a month later. I received another letter from their lawyer. I had expected a threat, a demand, but this was something so audacious, so utterly delusional, that I had to read it twice. They were suing me. They were taking me to family court. The claim was for breach of familial duty and elder support. They alleged that I had made a long-standing verbal contract to support them financially for the rest of their lives in exchange for their love and guidance. They were petitioning the court to garnish my wages to force me to resume paying their mortgage and provide them with an additional monthly stipend. I immediately called Ms. Albright, laughing as I read the letter to her over the phone. "Oh, they are magnificent," she said, a genuine note of awe in her voice. "They are so blinded by their own self-importance that they are going to march into court and hand us everything we need on a silver platter. They've just given us the perfect venue to present our counterclaim. Do you know what they've done? They've built their own gallows and are now asking you to please come and pull the lever." This was it. The end game. They had chosen the battlefield, a formal public setting where their lies would be measured against my cold, hard evidence. A courtroom where truth, at least in theory, was supposed to matter more than performance. Their arrogance would not just be their downfall, it would be the instrument of their public humiliation. I spent the next few weeks with Miss Albright preparing. We organized the evidence into a neat, undeniable timeline. Every payment, every text, every lie. I felt a calm confidence I hadn't felt in years. I had endured their cruelty, their manipulations, their public smears. I had played the role of the broken, defeated daughter, and now the curtain was about to rise on the final act. The day of the court hearing was gray and overcast, a perfect, pathetic fallacy for the storm that was about to break. I chose my outfit carefully, a simple, dark gray suit. Professional, serious. The opposite of the unstable mess they had painted me as. My grandmother came with me, her posture ramrod straight, her expression unreadable. She squeezed my hand as we sat down at the plaintiff's table. "Breathe," she whispered. "You've already won. This is just the paperwork." My parents arrived with their lawyer and my brother Kevin in tow. They looked confident, almost smug. My father was wearing his best suit, the one he called his power suit. He gave me a look of pure disdain, a look that said, "How dare you make me go through this?" My mother, draped in a silk scarf, refused to meet my eyes, opting instead to look around the courtroom as if she were assessing it for its decor. Kevin just looked sullen, like a teenager forced to go to a boring family function. They took their seats, a united front of delusion. Their lawyer, a slick man with too much hair gel, presented their case first. It was a masterpiece of fiction. He painted a picture of my parents as loving, doting caregivers who had generously allowed their troubled daughter to live with them. He spoke of their sacrifices, their constant emotional and financial support for me. He then portrayed me as an ungrateful, volatile child who, in a fit of pique, had suddenly cut them off, leaving them in dire financial straits. He spoke of a verbal promise, a sacred familial pact that I had broken. I sat there and listened, my face a neutral mask. I watched the judge, a woman with tired eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She listened patiently, occasionally jotting down a note. My father looked at the judge with a confident smile, as if he were charming a new client. He clearly believed this was all a formality. When it was Ms. Albright's turn, she stood up and walked to the lectern. She was the picture of calm professionalism. "Your Honor," she began, "we'd like to thank Mr. Henderson for his creative narrative. Now, I'd like to present the facts." And then she began. It wasn't a dramatic speech. It was a slow, methodical execution. She started with the bank statements, a single-bound volume of them. "Your Honor, these are my client's bank records for the past 10 years. I draw your attention to page 1, a recurring monthly payment to National Federated Mortgage for the sum of $4,212. And now, page 2 and page 3, for 123 consecutive months." She placed the binder on the judge's bench. I saw my father's smile falter. He leaned over and whispered something to his lawyer, who just shook his head. "Now, Miss," Albright continued, "the plaintiffs claim these were gifts, part of a vague familial pact, but my client, thankfully, has records of her correspondence with the plaintiffs." She then produced a second binder, this one filled with printouts of text messages and emails. She projected the first one onto the screen for the whole court to see. It was a text from my mother. "Sent you the power bill, sweetie. You're a lifesaver. We'll count it towards your equity in the house." A small murmur went through the few people in the gallery. The judge's eyes narrowed. My father's face began to lose its color. Miss Albright clicked to the next slide. An email from my father. "Mortgage payment. Please cover for this month. We'll sort you out or add it to your share of the estate. You're the best, kiddo." Slide after slide, text after text, email after email. A decade of their own words, their own acknowledgments that my money was not a gift but an investment. A loan. It was a systematic, brutal dismantling of their entire case. Their lawyer was shuffling his papers, looking flustered. My mother had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. This was the point where my father's composure began to crack. He was no longer looking at the judge. He was glaring at me, his eyes burning with a furious hatred. The mask was gone. This was the real man, the one I had lived with my whole life, the bully who had just realized his victim was holding a cannon. Ms. Albright saved the best for last. Finally, Your Honor, the plaintiff's entire case rests on the idea that my client is financially dependent and emotionally unstable, and that they, in their generosity, were providing for her. They filed a formal notice to have her evicted from her home, a home she was paying for, citing this alleged instability. She paused, letting the hypocrisy hang in the air. I would now like to present my client's most recent statement of assets. She handed a single piece of paper to the clerk, who passed it to the judge. The judge read it, and her eyebrows shot up. She looked from the paper to me, then back to the paper. Then she looked at my parents. "Mr. Henderson," the judge said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Your daughter has a net worth that is, conservatively, 5 times your own, the majority of it held in a trust established by your own mother. Were you aware of this?" And that was the moment, the final fatal blow. The moment my father's face went from pale shock to that mottled purple-gray of pure, impotent rage. He looked at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a deck. The lie was not just exposed, it was annihilated. He hadn't been the powerful benefactor helping his pathetic daughter. He had been the parasite, feeding off a host he never realized was infinitely stronger than he was. The unraveling was swift. My mother started to sob, not quiet, dignified tears, but loud, ugly, gasping sobs of utter humiliation. Kevin, in the gallery, looked like he had seen a ghost. His entire world, built on the foundation of his parents' financial security, had just been revealed as a house of cards built on my back. The judge delivered her verdict with an air of cold fury. She dismissed my parents' case with prejudice, calling it frivolous, malicious, and a disgraceful abuse of the court system. She then turned to our counterclaim. She validated it completely. She granted me a lien against their property for the full sum of the mortgage payments, plus all the utility bills, property taxes, and every other documented expense I had covered, with interest. "What this means, for the record," the judge said, looking directly at my father, "is that your house is currently in foreclosure. When the bank sells it, they will take their share first, and then Ms. Henderson will take hers. Whatever is left, if anything, will be yours. You have leveraged your daughter's love and generosity to ruin yourselves. This court is adjourned." The gavel fell with a crack that echoed the sound of my family's world shattering. It was over. The collapse was as swift and total as Ms. Albright had predicted. The bank, no longer having to deal with my parents' legal nonsense, moved quickly. The house went to a foreclosure auction. As it turned out, my father had taken out a second mortgage on the property years ago that I knew nothing about. Between the bank's primary loan, the second mortgage, and my legally mandated lien, the sale of the house barely covered the debts. My parents, after the dust settled, walked away with less than $5,000. From a 5-bedroom McMansion to a check that wouldn't cover 2 months' rent in a decent apartment. Their social standing, which was entirely propped up by the illusion of wealth, evaporated overnight. The friends who had flocked to their dinner parties suddenly stopped answering their calls. The gated community they were so proud of became a place of whispers and shame. They were forced to move into a cramped 2-bedroom rental in a rundown complex on the other side of town, the kind of place they used to mock. My father's business, which I now realized had been a sinking ship for years, went under completely without my monthly cash infusions to prop it up. He was forced into bankruptcy. At 65 years old, he had to look for a job, a humiliating endeavor for a man whose entire identity was built on being the boss. He ended up as a part-time consultant at a hardware store, wearing a bright orange apron and explaining the difference between drywall screws to strangers. The karmic perfection was not lost on me. My mother did not fare any better. Her life of leisure, of lunches and charity committees was over. She had to take a job as a cashier at a grocery store, a position that required her to be polite to people she considered her inferiors. I heard from a distant cousin that she was miserable, constantly complaining about her swollen feet and rude customers. And Kevin, poor, useless Kevin. With the bank of Mom and Dad permanently closed, he was forced to get a real job for the first time in his 30-year-old life. His entrepreneurial spirit didn't quite translate to the realities of the job market. He ended up as a delivery driver, a job he despised. His parents could no longer afford to pay for his car, his insurance, or his phone bill. He had to move into their tiny rental with them. The golden child now just another mouth to feed in a home filled with resentment and failure. They were ruined, financially, socially, and emotionally. They had lost everything because they were too greedy and too arrogant to appreciate the one person who was holding their entire world together. About 6 months after the court case, my father made one final desperate attempt. He somehow found out where I lived and showed up at my apartment building. My intercom buzzed and his face appeared on the small screen looking 10 years older. He was gaunt, his eyes hollow. "Sweetheart," he said, his voice raspy, "please just let me come up. We need to talk. This has all been a terrible misunderstanding." I listened, my hand hovering over the talk button. He went on, a pathetic torrent of excuses. He blamed the economy. He blamed his lawyer. He blamed my mother's spending habits. He never once blamed himself. He never once said the words, "I'm sorry." "I know we made mistakes," he said, his voice cracking, "but you're my daughter. Family is all that matters. We can fix this. We can start over." I thought about all the years I had craved to hear him say he needed me. And now, here he was, broken and begging, and I felt nothing. No pity, no anger, just a vast, empty distance. He was a stranger on a screen. I pressed the button. My voice was calm and clear. "I'm sorry," I said. "You must have the wrong apartment." I let go of the button and hit the one that ended the call, cutting him off mid-sentence. I watched on the screen as he stood there for a moment, his face a mask of confusion, before he finally turned and shuffled away, a defeated old man swallowed up by the city. The door to that part of my life was not just closed, it was locked, bolted, and barricaded. And that brings me back to now, to today. Sitting in the sun-filled living room of my own home, the deed in my name, holding this letter from their lawyer. It looks so small and insignificant now, a relic from a forgotten war. Mark walks in with 2 mugs of coffee, placing one on the coaster beside me. He sees the letter in my hand. "What's that?" he asks, his voice full of the easy warmth I've come to cherish. "Just a reminder," I say, folding the letter neatly, "a reminder of a lesson I had to learn the hard way." He wraps his arms around my shoulders from behind, resting his chin on my head. He doesn't press for details. He doesn't need to. He just knows that I'm here, with him, and that whatever battles I fought in the past, I won. His presence is a quiet testament to a future built on respect and genuine affection, not obligation and utility. He is everything they were not. I think of what my grandmother told me all those years ago as we celebrated my victory with a bottle of champagne she'd been saving. "Never set yourself on fire to keep others warm," she had said, raising her glass, "especially when they're the ones who handed you the matches and are standing by waiting to enjoy the show." She was right. I had spent a decade burning piece by piece to fuel their comfort and their ego. The letter wasn't a weapon they used against me. It was the alarm that finally woke me up to the smell of smoke. It forced me to drop the matches, walk away from the fire, and let them be consumed by the cold they had created for themselves. I stand up and walk to the fireplace. Mark is watching me, a questioning look on his face. I don't say a word. I simply toss the letter into the grate. It's not lit, of course, but the symbolism is what matters. It belongs in the ashes of a life I left behind. My new life, the one I built for myself, is warm enough on its own.